and I try to write a little bit every day, even if that's only 100 words. But I found that just keeps me in really close contact with the book. It means that I don't come back to my desk after kind of 2 weeks away in a totally different mode, because you are when you're on book tour and you're talking about the previous book, all of that. I would find that I would have to sort of almost like brush a film of dust off the kind of current book and really like try and remember where I was, sort of reintroduce myself to my characters, pick up the thread. That took a while. And this way, it just keeps it really alive for me. Basically, that first draft is all about just getting the story down. And so I write fast. It's kind of fast and dirty. I can't even do that thing that I know some authors do, which is, which sounds very kind of sane, which is sort of the next morning, kind of coming back to the work you've done the previous day and sort of editing that before you start. I can't do that. Like, that would slow me down too much. I just have to get it all out there. And then, you know, when I come to do the edit, that's actually when I do sit down at my desk and I need the big screen, because, you know, things are messy. And that's where kind of, I guess it feels like the real work takes place. The sort of the first part is fun and is sort of just creative messiness. And then when I come to the edit, that's where the work happens.
Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. My name's Dan Simpson. Every week on the podcast, we chat to the greatest authors in the world. We find out how, when, and where they get their ideas down. What do they do to turn something into a bestseller? And this week we've got a multi-million bestseller. Lucy Foley, the new Queen of Mystery, joins us. Lucy's big breakout hit was The Hunting Party back in 2019. She followed that up with The Guest List and then The Paris Apartment. And all of her novels are currently in the works, being produced for film and TV. She's been sold in more than 40 countries, sold more than 5 million books, and she's back with a brand new novel. It's called The Midnight Feast. Lucy first came on the show in 2020. Since then, we've had a global lockdown. She's had 2 children and loads of bestsellers. So there's a lot to catch up on. You can hear what she's still discovering about the storytelling process, how quick she likes her first draft to be, and there's loads about the brand new book. If you like this episode, you've got more than 350 of the best authors around sharing how they get to work in our Writer's Routine podcast. Take a listen wherever you get your shows. And we always start with exactly the same question, so let's get into it with Lucy Foley and what she sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
In my office, I am surrounded by boxes because we've just moved into this our new house, and they are all boxes of books. So I'm quite excited to kind of go through those and sort of kind of rediscover them all again.
Well, so if you've moved and moved off the back of some serious success with novels, I imagine you might have a bit more space in your office, so you can like curate it, you can design, you can make it the space that you want to write. What are you thinking of having around you?
I think the main difference now is I actually have a space to write in the house. I didn't have that before. I had a desk, but it was in like our main open plan living area, and it was it was just surrounded by kind of bits of Duplo and like the general detritus of our life. So as you can imagine, not much work got done there. So I'm gonna get some pictures up on the walls. I'm gonna get some bookshelves in. I'm gonna get a rug, and then I'm probably still not gonna do very much work here because I can't really, well, certainly for the first draft, I can't really work at my desk. It has to be somewhere else, anywhere else really.
Well, I remember this. So we've done this before about, what are we? I don't know why I looked at my watch to tell the year. We're 2025. I think we did it 2019, just before lockdown. I was listening back to kind of get my head around how you wrote then, and you would go to coffee shops. Now, the one thing that would have changed in 2020 is you would have stopped being able to go to coffee shops, mate.
Honestly, that was hard. Well, sorry, there were things that were a lot harder about the pandemic than me not being able to go to my coffee shop. But, you know, it shook up my routine a lot.
So if that's where you were going to write, now you've got children, you were stopped being able to go somewhere to write. So how did that impact where you were able to work and how much did you have to kind of change your mentality of just kind of getting down and getting on with it?
Yeah, I mean, I really did. I think I just kept it as sort of, I think the thing for me is as soon as it feels too much like work, it's writing that first draft. That's when it gets scary. So I guess I just listened to a lot of music. I sat down at a kitchen table rather than at a desk, with a cup of coffee. I actually heard of writers during the pandemic playing like coffee shop sounds to themselves. I didn't quite go that far. But basically, for me, as long as it feels kind of a little bit sort of provisional, it doesn't feel all too kind of momentous, like, I'm kind of sitting down and I've got to create this work of fiction, it has to feel like fun. So I try to kind of just keep it like that as much as possible, I guess. And I've gone back to that since. I very much work in coffee shops now.
And in the new space, if you're writing first drafts, maybe this isn't the case if you're going out to coffee shops to write your first drafts. Because of the nature of what you write, they seem to be quite meticulously plotted. I remember you were all about your notebooks at the time. Are we still there? Is there any grander plotting everywhere?
No, still all about the notebooks. I've actually now got one of those digital notebooks as well, which I am a bit obsessed with. I love it. But I do still love the old moleskin. I would say, like that's where it all takes place. That's where the kind of magic happens, if we can call it that, of the first draft. Kind of mainly writing longhand in a notebook, just kind of getting it all down. It keeps it really free for me. It means that I feel like I'll keep using that word. It means that, I know I can just scribble stuff out. If I can't think of the right word or the right phrase, I'll put it in brackets and I'll come back to it when I then come to type it up. But I basically, that first draft is all about just getting the story down. And so I write fast. It's kind of fast and dirty. I can't even do that thing that I know some authors do, which is, which sounds very kind of sane, which is sort of the next morning kind of coming back to the work you've done the previous day and sort of editing that before you start. I can't do that. Like that would slow me down too much. I just have to get it all out there. And then, when I come to do the edit, that's actually when I do sit down at my desk and I need the big screen because, things are messy. And that's where kind of, I guess it feels like the real work takes place. The first part is fun and is sort of just creative messiness. And then when I come to the edit, that's where the work happens.
You said that you'll use the word free a lot. And you mentioned with where you write, you don't want it to feel momentous, that you are doing this big thing. Why is that so important to you, the idea that you are free to kind of write when and wherever you want?
Well, I think for me, it's fun. It's like playful. So I would say it's a difference between work and play. Whereas I feel like as soon as I sit down at a desk to write that first draft, if I were to, it would take me straight back to kind of sitting down to do my homework, when I came back from school. And that is not what I wanted to feel like. That is not where the story happens for me. For me, it's kind of, I'm more in a daydream. I'm not doing my homework, if you know what I mean. That's the distinction.
And so let's talk about the routine then. It's really funny. I was looking at the episode notes that I wrote for the last time we chatted, and let me pull them up because it really made me laugh. I think I describe it about 80 times as decadent. So the way that you wrote back in 2019, 2020 was decadent, because I remember you would kind of do your thing, then you would go to the cinema or you would go for lunch or tea during the afternoon. The glory days. So just take us through your writing routine now, Lucy, a day in the life of you getting to work. How does the whole thing look?
Yeah, I have a little bit less time going to the cinema on my own or, just kind of wafting around because I've got 2 little boys. So life is very full and mad. But I work whenever they're in childcare, basically. So they're both at nursery now. The oldest one's about to go to school. And I want to be kind of full on and really present when they're around. So I never try and sort of work, while they're in the house really. But whenever they're in nursery, that is my time to get down to my desk and not to my desk, to my coffee shop and to get down to work. So it's very focusing. I mean, I do think now I'm like, what was I doing before? Why wasn't I writing kind of 3 books a year? I had so much time. I was clearly in the cinema or having lunch.
It's quite time pressured though, if you know that you're going to get this concentrated window. I don't know how long kids go to nursery for, 3-4 hours, whatever it is. You've got this squash time where you're under contract, you need to get a book done, what do you do to try and make the most of that?
It's a really good point. And actually, at the beginning, when the littlest one was first at nursery, he was only in for, childcare, he was only in for 2 hours a day. Well, I worked out by the time I dropped him off, I had 2 hours to kind of sit down and write. So I had a little bit of a drive to get to kind of my favourite coffee shop, and I would use that to kind of change over into kind of writer mode. And that would sometimes involve listening to a podcast like this one, or listening to a book. I love audiobooks, listening to a book I found inspiring, or just listening to some music and sort of starting thinking about getting myself into the plot. So it would sort of involve this kind of transition of moving from kind of mum mode, like wrangling mode, to kind of creative author mode. But that was important. It was really good that I had that drive, because I think if I'd gone straight one to the other, I would have sat there for at least half an hour kind of trying to sort of think myself into it.
When I was listening back, you said that when you first started writing, you tried to keep office hours because that's what you were used to. Then you realised that was actually useless to you, so you did it by a word count. Now, when your time is even more condensed than it's ever been before, how do you know what the aim is every day?
Do you know, it's so interesting because that word count thing I focused on, that was my kind of thing until really quite recently. And I realised, it was actually with this book that I'm writing at the moment, I realised I was probably focusing on the wrong thing. Like The Midnight Feast, it was such a fun book to write, but I probably did end up with quite a lot of wastage. That's partly because of my kind of plotting or lack of plotting, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But also I think, if you're always just focused on the word count, you're possibly focused on the wrong thing. I think I was focusing on getting down that quantity over quality. And actually in the editing process, I had to sort of refine to make sure that quality was the only thing that was left on the page. And now my kind of shift of that is to try and write every day, which I wasn't doing before. So, I wouldn't write at the weekend. I wouldn't write if I went on a book tour or something. I still don't really write at the weekend because I want to be with the little boys. But, I've just been on a book tour. I've been 2 weeks in the States, and I try to write a little bit every day, even if that's only 100 words. But I found that just keeps me in really close contact with the book. It means that I don't come back to my desk after kind of 2 weeks away in a totally different mode, because you are when you're on book tour and you're talking about the previous book, all of that. I would find that I would have to sort of almost like brush a film of dust off the kind of current book and really try and remember where I was, sort of reintroduce myself to my characters, pick up the thread. That took a while. And this way, it just keeps it really alive for me. So that's my kind of new thing, write every day. It doesn't have to be, 1,000 words, 2,000 words. Inevitably, if you say, well, I don't really feel like writing today, but you know what, I'm just going to get a few words down, you find that you end up writing a lot more than you planned to, than you thought you would. So you think, I'll just write 100 words. And suddenly, without that pressure of I must get this amount down, you end up kind of going a lot further.
It's like any exercise, isn't it, really? Yeah. They say you never regret a run. And yeah. It's a different thing. But last night I came back late-ish from work and I really couldn't be bothered. But I thought, I've sat down all day, and I went out, and 5 minutes later, I was kind of jazzed and ready to go for much longer. What was it about? Well, what was the moment where you realised that maybe quantity over quality wasn't the best thing for you? Was there a particular sentence or chapter, or just something you thought, this isn't as good as it could be if I just loosened myself up?
I think it was sort of observing myself. It was kind of just being a bit more, mindful about it. I sort of sat there one day and I realised I'm focusing on getting the words down on the page. I'm not kind of really thinking about getting the best words down on the page. It was a sort of realization. I kind of even remember where I was. I was in one of my favorite coffee shops, and I just thought, you know what? I'm not going to count. I'm just going to, yeah. I think it helped me in a sense. It was a good sort of metric, and maybe it's also to do with moving from a book a year to a book every 2 years. I've got a little bit more breathing room. And I would never say that it meant that, the final book wasn't kind of wasn't quality over quantity. It just meant that there was much more refining to do later in the process, I think. So in a way, I think it doesn't save time. That's the thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Has it been tricky though? Because writing without a word count to then writing with a word count, that really makes you disciplined, because you know you need to get that stuff done, and sometimes, as you say, that means it's quantity over quality. But then flipping the narrative around again, was it smooth sailing straight away?
It's worked for me so far. I mean, I haven't been doing it for that long. It's probably been just the writing of this book, but I don't know. It just means that, I'm really kind of thoughtful about what actually. I'm still certainly with the first draft, I'm still kind of writing very freely, but I'm not putting that pressure on myself to sort of get that extra page down if I don't have the right idea for that extra page, if that makes sense. Yeah.
But how do you, if there is no aim, if you're just keeping, as you say, close contact with your story every day, how do you know when you're done? Or is it just the time that you need to go back to nursery?
Oh, I mean, I know what the word count is, and I know when my deadline is. So I know, how much I've got left to do. I'm just not on any given day. There might be a day where I write 500 words because that's all I'm feeling like I'm able to do that day. There might be a day when I write 3,000 words. And actually, the funny thing is, when you set yourself a word count of kind of 2,000 words there, I think that was my ambitious word count. I was like, I had a really good day if I wrote 2,000 words. It's actually, there's also a kind of temptation to, once you've got to that 2,000 words, to just down tools. Whereas actually, if you're having a really good day writing, why would you not just carry on? And because sometimes, the muse is with you, or whatever kind of cheesy sort of metaphor you want to use. But if you're really feeling it, like one of those days when you go for a run and you say, I'm just going to go for a little bit, and you end up running 10 miles, just carry on. So it feels like a much more organic way to do it for me. And it seems just as productive.
I'm kind of loath to ask this question, just because I imagine someone will say, well, why don't you ask that to a man? And I would ask it to a man. It's just you're the first person I've ever spoken to where I've spoken to you twice and there's been 2 children in between, right? So that's quite a significant change, and it's adapted your decadent style of writing. So, and by the way, having a worldwide pandemic smashed in the middle of that too, how much did having the children change your mindset as to the work, and how much you needed to dedicate time to those, because you want to be a present parent, and also you want to be a successful author that gives readers what they want? How much of a tussle has that been?
I mean, it changed it massively at first. I had 2 books where I was meant to deliver them before the baby, and the baby. So it was sort of like a race between the baby and the book, which was going to, get there first. And both times the baby won. And so with the Paris apartment, I had to be really brave and say to my editor, sort of about a month before my due date, do you know what? You're not going to have the book this summer. It's going to be, and it knocked it out of the schedule by a year. But it was so eye-opening, because it meant that once I came back to my desk post my kind of maternity leave, I had a few months more with it. And I found so much more story there that I wouldn't have found if I delivered it that summer, kind of in a big old rush, just trying to get it over the line. I sort of sat with it. I'd sat with it for 6 months, while I was on maternity leave, rolling the story around in my head, going on long walks with the baby, thinking about it the whole time. And I think it made it much richer for it. So it sort of changed it in a really dramatic way in that sense. Obviously, it's kind of made my time, I have to be more focused about when I am writing. But I think in the essentials, especially now, that things are a little bit, we're slightly out of that tiny, tiny baby phase, and I do have childcare and all of that, I'm slightly kind of getting back to sort of kind of more business as usual. I'm writing, but I'm also allowing myself the freedom to yes, every so often go to the cinema at lunchtime if I want to, if that feels creative, or go for a walk. Because I think sometimes the best way of getting yourself out of a plot hole, or kind of conquering writer's block, is doing something that very much isn't writing. I'm sure most writers say this. It's like, get yourself away from your notebook or your screen. Do something. For me, it's something kinetic, like going for a walk, baking, rearranging my bookshelves. It sort of unlocks something in your subconscious. It's very strange. I've had some of my kind of biggest kind of plot twist moments, or solving a hole in the plot, when I've been away from my desk doing something else and actively not thinking about it.
And having that 6 months, that extra bonus bit of time, which completely changed and added quite a lot to the story. How much do you now factor that into what you write? That well, if I have more time, I can let it breathe a bit more, and everything doesn't need to be so rushed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just a real eye-opener. I think it's just allow yourself that time. Don't deadlines. I mean, deadlines are really important for me. I think, if I had a deadline in 10 years' time, I would probably spend 9.5 of those years kind of wandering around, like thinky thoughts about the book and not actually writing it. And then sort of, well, how much time have I given myself? 6 months? That sounds quite tight. 6 months just crying and writing, and kind of doing all the work. So I do need a deadline, but I also think it's important not to kind of fixate on the wrong thing. I think it is important to give the story time to breathe, as much as you can within the time frame that you're sort of allowed.
And just back to the day, when you've got the boys from childcare, from nursery, whatever it is, have you got any space to think about what you're writing, or is it just full on, let's be a parent?
Then it's full on, let's be a parent. Definitely with them. Anyone with like little children will probably know they are the most present people you have ever met. Like they are so focused on whatever it is they're doing, and and that sort of makes you focused in that way. And, I want to kind of play with them, draw with them, read books to them. I don't want to sort of have one part of my mind somewhere else. And I'm also literally not able to, the nearly 2-year-old is at any moment about to sort of throw himself off something, or stick his finger in a plug socket, so you have that constant sort of need for focus on them. But funny enough, I mean, when they've gone to bed, my poor husband, that's often when I start thinking, because you do, when you're in the real writing phase of a book, you are really, it's there the whole time in the background. So once they're in bed, I'll be thinking about it when I'm cooking, when I'm sort of having a bath, like all of that. It's sort of ticking away in the background.
And just other changes in the last 5 or so years then. Well, because of the 2-year schedule, you've not actually published that many more books as some authors are like. Some authors are trapped at like 3 books a year or some mad schedule like that. Whereas you've allowed yourself this space to breathe. And you're now translated into over 40 countries, sold millions and millions, everything's being made for telly. So you are a success. Do you feel that more now with who you are, the position that you are as an author? Maybe you have a bit more power in negotiations or with your publishers that maybe you didn't have before?
I mean, this probably isn't the answer that anyone wants to hear, but I think so many authors I've spoken to have said the same thing. Even, if they've sold, millions and millions and millions of copies and they've written 50 books. I think we all have a sort of certain level of kind of built-in imposter syndrome. I definitely have that. I think that's mainly because it still looks the same, right? My writing, it's still me and my notebook in a coffee shop, on my own. You've sort of got to solve it all yourself, pretty much. Yes, there are conversations you have with your editor or with your partner or friends or whatever, but ultimately it's you and your story trying to work things out. And every book presents its own new set of glorious challenges. So each time I think, when I start a new book, I think, well, I'm not going to make the mistakes I made before. I'm going to, this is the time that I don't kind of find myself in a sort of plot cul-de-sac thinking, how the hell do I get myself out of here? And, it's all going to be kind of plain like easy sailing. And that never happens. But that's also part of the kind of challenge and satisfaction of it for me, is getting myself out of those tight spots.
Is there a pressure now that perhaps there wasn't before because you've sold many more and you've got kids now, and there are readers all around the world that are really excited for a new Lucy Foley book, and you've been dubbed this generation's Agatha Christie. Like, that's a lot. Do you feel that more than perhaps you did back then?
Do you know, funny enough, I don't actually feel that as pressure. I think I put enough pressure on myself anyway. Like, even if no one were going to read the book, I still have that sort of kind of professional pride in it, that sort of pressure I put on myself. So I think that sort of knowing that there are readers out there who will read the book, that I actually find sort of more energizing in a way. I think I want to it's quite a positive thing. It's like, I really want to give them something they're really going to enjoy. I want to give them something new with this book. So in the Midnight Feast, I thought about, like, how can I sort of ring the changes again? What kind of new element can I introduce that people might really enjoy? And I think it's also about being brave. I was aware that introducing some sort of slight folk horror elements into the Midnight Feast, some people might not go for that, if they wanted more of a kind of classic murder mystery. But I always want to kind of keep things fresh and write the book. The main thing is write the book that I'm really excited to write. I think that's the thing that sort of I've had from the very beginning. It's write a story that really interests me, and because I don't plot, it's like I don't know exactly where it's going to go, and hopefully that will keep the reader interested too. That's kind of really my only test for it, because it's only me at my desk at the beginning. I have to be the one that's excited to know where the story's going to end up.
And you speak about imposter syndrome, and if you're the only one right at the start that's judging it, have you noticed yourself improving? Or are you getting better at knowing whether it's good first time around?
I think I'm getting better at accepting all the things that you're going to have along the way. So that kind of 30,000 words, for me, it's that stage. I know for other authors, it's a different stage of writing. For me, it's 30,000 words. You've written a lot, but you've got a long way to go. And it can feel a bit like, is this working? Does this sort of, I think for me, it's a bit like, I talk about the wall in the marathon. For me, it's that 30,000 words, probably quite early. But it's sort of knowing that I have got through that before and kind of knowing to push through. It's sort of trusting that there will be days where, for me, sometimes it's almost kind of one day on, one day off, where I'll have a day where I think, I really like this book. It feels like it's really working. And literally the next morning, nothing will have changed about the book, but my entire mentality will be different. And I'll think, I think this is all dreadful. And that, I think, is inevitable if you're working on your own on something and you're the only one looking at it, and you're kind of seeing it through the prism of whatever has happened to you that day, whether you've slept well, just your kind of whole mindset can shift. But I think sort of 8 books in, as I am now, I've just accepted that's part of the process. And I've also accepted my process, or lack thereof. I think there was definitely a stage where I thought, well, proper authors, plot everything out really carefully. They have these spreadsheets. They have this beautiful, like a crime scene investigation you see in like a TV drama, where you've got all the things on the wall and you've got the strings going between them and all of that. It needs to look like that. And I've accepted that is not the way I write a book. So that has all definitely made it easier. Has it made it easier in terms of the actual knowing whether the writing's good? Probably not, because as I say, I try to write a different book each time. So each time it's a new challenge and a new set of issues.
But have you actively been learning about like better ways to engage a reader? Like, there is and there's not a perfect way to write, but there are things that you can do to improve, right? There's a reason why Stephen King is a much better writer than I am. Like, have you actively been picking up on those things?
Oh, absolutely. I think there are certain sort of technical things that I think about really carefully. And I can't remember if I said this the last time we chatted, and I can't remember if this is something I was doing, but I get a little bit itchy if a scene gets longer than 2,000 words. I start to think that's the point as a reader, when you can kind of, it's with a thriller, when you can really put the book down. And I don't want you to put the book down. So I think about that. I think quite a lot about sort of 5-act structure, and where I've got my sort of, in the kind of really dramatic sense, like a screenwriter might, or a playwright might, like, where have I got my sort of act climaxes, all of that. Doesn't mean I necessarily have that in the first draft, but it means when I kind of come back to do that edit, I'm thinking about like, are, because the reader will have certain expectations of things, that things should be happening at a certain point. And if they're not happening, you start to get a bit fidgety. And so I sort of think about that, where's my first act, where's my second act, where are my kind of act climaxes?
There are 3 things that you'd thought about last start that have changed.
Yes, and the third thing would be, and I learned this really recently, and I really thought about it when I was editing The Midnight Feast, is within each scene almost having kind of a beginning, middle and end. So thinking about the kind of shape of the scene as a little kind of mini story, but crucially not giving the reader too much of an ending. So not kind of wrapping each scene up with a nice bow, because again, that's the moment where they might think, oh, well, that's kind of solved for me. I can put the book down. It's actually getting into the scene and getting out of it as quickly as possible. And sometimes I would write that ending to the scene and then I would cut it out and refuse to give it to you and kind of move things on. So it's all that. I love that sort of geeky kind of technical stuff, kind of getting down in the weeds on that.
And where does the learning for that come from? Is it just yourself reading a lot, doing it? Is it discussions with editors and agents? Is it feedback from listeners?
It's all sorts of places. I mean, one of the things I love doing, I listen to lots of kind of really sort of geeky screenwriting podcasts. I'm very inspired by sort of screenwriting. And so I listened obsessively to like every screenwriting podcast there was on, say, Succession, because I thought that was such a brilliant show, or The White Lotus, or just kind of more general like screenwriting tips. And there's actually a wonderful book called, I think it's called Screenwriting Tips for Authors. It was self-published by an author. She's also a screenwriter. And so that's all about kind of thinking about 5-act structure, all of that. I also love books like Patricia Highsmith's, an oldie but a goodie, Plotting, Writing, Suspense Fiction. That's an amazing one. I've come back and read that every time I've been sort of writing a new book. It works for any genre, really. I know it's meant to be suspense fiction, but honestly, like that advice is very transferable. Stephen King's on writing. I mean, that is like the Bible. That certainly advocates writing every day, which I think is, I can totally see why it does. Yes, as you say, reader feedback, conversations with my editor, just observing great storytelling, whether that's the books I'm reading, the fiction books I'm reading at the time, or listening to, things I'm watching on TV, films I'm watching. Always been massively inspired by film. It's all around us, great storytelling and the kind of advice that you can sort of glean from it.
So the newest novel is The Midnight Feast. This has been out for about 6 months, I think, in various forms. I know it's out in paperback at the moment. What was the first idea, the seed that gave you this story? How did it present itself to you?
Yeah, great question. Well, The Midnight Feast is set at the opening of a kind of beautiful new countryside hotel. And the first seed that inspired me was the opening of a beautiful new countryside hotel. Not a million miles away from where I live. Have to be careful exactly what I say so no one comes for me. But what kind of fascinated me was that the local community were up in arms about it. There was this whole sort of really vitriolic campaign against the opening of this hotel. And that, as a kind of thriller writer, I'm always looking for sort of sources of tension. And that was just this huge, it really sort of got my imagination fired up. I think also kind of moving back down to the countryside, because I kind of grew up here, lived in London for 10 years, moving back down, it was sort of observing things that were going on kind of locally, like this sort of, there did seem to be this real kind of resurgence of sort of interest in like the old ways and like pagan stuff. And they burn a Wicker Man down the road from me at Beltane, which is the spring festival. And it's quite kind of, it is quite Wicker Man. It's quite kind of, oh, nearly fell off my chair there. This is my special ergonomic writing stool thing, which I actually never sit on. So that felt like another element that I thought would be a really great way to contrast with this sort of, the hotel is this very curated version of the countryside. It's this sort of Instagram perfect. It's all very fragrant. The guests complain about the smell of manure like wafting from the local farm because they want the countryside, but they don't really. They want it to all be very sort of perfected. And then sort of contrast it with this sort of ancient, folkloric, sort of quite kind of nature red in tooth and claw version of nature. It was the two things, I think, that really sparked the book into life.
You've said that now you've got these 2 years to write as opposed to just 1 year, so that stretches everything out. So just take us through kind of that timeline of how long will you give yourself? You've got this idea. I know that you write quite furiously. How long will you give yourself to let things breathe? And what are you thinking about before you start writing?
Really good question. Funny enough, the book I'm writing at the moment is a little bit different. So I'm writing a Miss Marple novel for the Agatha Christie estate, which is a huge honour. Also, at the beginning was a huge honour and really quite scary. And what I really wanted to do was spend quite a lot of time, having said, I don't plot and all of that. I don't plot in the kind of the sort of physical sense, in that I don't have that sort of, as I say, that spreadsheet. But what I did want to do with this book was spend a lot of time with the story, kind of growing the story and the characters in my head before I sat down. I wanted it to feel, and this really is the case with every book, but probably never as much as with this book, really get to that point where I felt like I had to write, like the story was just like bursting out of me, and these characters, I had to start committing them to the page. I didn't want to kind of write my way into this book in quite the same way that I maybe did sort of starting out. So I probably gave myself about a year, because it's also historical. It's set in the 1950s. So I gave myself about a year of kind of living with these characters, starting to think about the setting, the story, doing all my research. I say all my research. The research never really ends. You're kind of researching the whole way through plotting, because you'll be writing and you'll think, was this kind of lighter used at that time? And like, did people use that phrase? And you were constantly sort of researching stuff. But that just meant that I felt so much more kind of confident about where I was when I sort of started out. I'm really excited about the story. So yeah, I feel like I'm really going back on myself now and saying that I don't plot, but I don't plot. I don't know exactly what's going to happen at any given point. I know the shape of the story, but I have to leave space for things to excite me along the way, as they have now in the kind of year of writing it. I've had lots of surprises, and I live for those moments as a writer. I think it's really, for me, it's really important to leave space for those.
But then, if you know the shape of the story, but also you've talked about knowing the shape of individual chapters and having a beginning, a middle, and an end, which you won't give us the end. When is that becoming apparent to you? How that's gonna present itself? What a chapter will look like?
I think a lot of that is in the edit. So so I'm conscious when I'm writing a scene, I don't want this to go much over 2,000 words. So I'm thinking about that at the outset. But sometimes I let myself, I indulge myself, because you don't necessarily know which bits of that you want to keep. But then in the edit, that is refining and refining and refining. And the edit, this is why I say it's the bit that really feels like work, because it really is. It's, making sure that everything that's in my head has made its way onto the page. And for me, that's because I write in this sort of multiple POV from different people, in different people's viewpoint, in different people's voice. That doesn't necessarily make it onto the page in the first draft. Those characters might feel really distinct to me in my mind, but do they sound that way on the page? So the draft, the next draft and the next draft and the editing process is all about refining that voice, making sure that kind of the way people, the phrases that people use, the way they swear, their sort of use of idiom, like all of that feels really distinct, so that when you open the book and on any given page, you know exactly who's talking to you without kind of looking at the chapter heading, if that makes sense.
And now, as I said, there are readers that want a new Lucy Foley novel, and you've mentioned that as a writer, you are trying to change the way that you do things to just present yourself with a different challenge. But how much of those similarities kind of still need to be there? I remember right at the start, you were very much in like locked room mysteries, and it was trying to search for another place that you could contain these characters. How much is that and those decisions still very for the forefront of your mind?
So I think the things that I really think about, the main thing with writing this sort of book, and the thing that I find really satisfying about reading a murder mystery, is that it's kind of like a contract between the author and the reader. So you're saying, I'm going to present you with a puzzle, and I'm going to play fair. So I'm going to give you, they're going to be there, the tools that you need to solve this puzzle, if you're kind of keeping an eye out for them. And I'm going to throw in some tricks along the way. But hopefully when that solution comes, you're not going to feel tricked. You're going to feel, oh, of course, like I could have seen that coming, or I should have seen that coming. Like that makes sense, because I think that's a much more satisfying feeling than like the author's just pulled a rabbit out of a hat, but you could never have known what was kind of in that. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of going back to Christie and the way she wrote her books. So that is kind of at the very core of these books, kind of in their DNA, is making sure that I am honouring that contract, I think, with the reader, so that I'm putting those breadcrumbs in place. I would prefer that they guessed than they felt like they'd been tricked, because that's a kind of cheap feeling. You know, it's sort of, you might be surprised, but it's a kind of hollow sort of surprise. You're like, well, if it's sort of something that's come from totally left field, like, what does that mean? Like, that's not kind of satisfying in any way. So I think that's the real constant across them. Yes, you know, in this book, it's not a closed circle book, but it's sort of, how can I kind of ring fence my suspects in a, you know, I'm sort of drawing a circle around them for the reader, because that is part of the contract. It's like, I'm not going to have this random person that I've suddenly introduced on page 300 that is then the killer. You know, you want to be kind of aware of your pool of suspects, all of that. So it's still a kind of closed circle in that sense. But I think there's a way of sort of ringing the changes while kind of staying true to the DNA of a murder mystery.
It still baffles me that someone is able to not plot, really, but yet have this intricate murder mystery filled with red herrings. At what point are these things coming to you, or is it all almost after the fact? Like, you found out that you've dropped a guitar into the front living room, whatever it is, and it turns out that, oh, that was the murder weapon, or that kind of thing.
So that's the thing. I think it'd probably be more accurate to say the plotting happens it happens at a different point in the sort of chronology of writing the book. So the plotting sort of happens more kind of retroactively, I suppose. So it's in that editing process that I make sure that I've got, you know, as I say, that act structure in place, that I've got all my kind of red herrings and my clues in there. And that, oh my goodness, that is kind of one of the hardest things about writing these books. That can, you know, be sort of refined across several drafts, like putting too much in. You know, often I think I've really hidden something and I've actually put a big flashing arrow at it. And other things, I think, well, I've really played fair here. I've got my hints and you know, clues in there, and I really haven't. They're only obvious to me because I got kind of, you know, I've lost my innocence. So that it's like, it's putting things on the scale, taking them off, making sure, you know, certain things don't totally throw the balance off. Finding new readers, because obviously with each reader, as I say, lost my innocence, they've kind of lost their innocence. You know, they know who done it. So you need to kind of find someone else to read it and tell you whether they guessed. So that, again, that's a really challenging part of it, but it's also immensely fun and satisfying to it's like kind of, you're building the puzzle, you're constructing this game, which is great.
And talking about that puzzle, I'm looking at my bookshelf and I see books where, as time moves on, the nature of what that puzzle is so much more creative than it has been before. So, you know, books where you as a reader, you are a character in the murder mystery in a completely different way and you're addressed, or ones where there are stories within stories, and that's kind of half the challenge now, right? So as an author, what's the balance of wanting to write a cracking murder mystery, but also wanting to be at the vanguard of telling it in a really novel way?
So I absolutely love books that do that. I love like the Anthony Horowitz, like I'm reading Marple Murders at the moment, which is amazing. It's a book within a book. It's so clever. I love reading books like that. I'm not sure, I don't get too hung up on, I've got to, you know, yes, the puzzle needs to be there, but I think for me, the emphasis is always going to be more on character. So I've talked a lot about plot here, but actually for me, first and foremost, it's the kind of psychology that keeps me interested in those characters and what motivates them and why they're doing what they've done. So I would say that, yes, while I've talked a lot about plot and all those things that I think about, I start with my characters. That first draft is kind of really getting to know them, making them feel sort of multi-dimensional and layered, hopefully, and complex and like real people. I mean, I totally believe that they're real people when I'm writing a book, and I think that's really important. And plot sort of comes out of them. So I try not to get too hung up on that, like, how can I create this sort of really clever locked room in which there's no way to possibly get into the room? I think there's less focus for me on the how done it than the why done it, if that makes sense.
Just lastly, then, on character, you mentioned that you're writing a Miss Marple novel. Now, the thing is with a character like that that's been around for such a long time is everyone thinks they know them the best, like ardent fans, and that could lead to a cliche about who they actually are, right? If it was Sherlock Holmes, we all know the Deerstalker hat and we know the pipe, but there's a lot more to him than that. And it's the same with someone like Miss Marple. How have you got to know her in your own way in order to tell a story effectively and uniquely?
What I've realised rereading the books, I'm probably on my third rereading of them at the moment, is there are so many things about Marple that I hadn't appreciated. Yes, I had this idea of this sort of little elderly woman with her knitting, you know, the kind of spinster, all of that. But she's really funny. She's got this great sense of humour. She's always in on the joke, which I think is interesting. It's a distinction in the Poirots. The joke is often at his expense, so it's him and his sort of funny ways. With Marple, so there are often kind of jokes made at her expense. You know, the sort of twittery, spinstery, kind of gossipy old village maid, but she knows how people see her, and she plays up to that, and she kind of uses it to her advantage. And so she sort of uses her kind of guise as this sort of innocent little old woman to kind of run rings around people, and uses her invisibility as her superpower. And that's been really fun to explore. And also, yes, it's a book sort of set in the 1950s, but it feels like a very kind of 2020s thing. You know, it's talking about kind of aging and women becoming invisible after a certain age. That feels kind of very current. So that's been fun to explore. I think another thing is she's actually much more sprightly than people realise, certainly early in the books. I mean, in like Caribbean Mystery, she's sort of crouching down under a window at one point. She's sort of pretending she's broken her shoe. So I think it's making sure that I sort of don't forget about those elements of Marple. And I think the way to do that really is to keep going back to the books. I've got sort of, you should see them. I've got kind of Post-it notes throughout them. I've got like very geeky little sort of files of kind of Marple mannerisms and Marpleisms, and just to make sure that it all feels that I'm not just taking away this idea or something and sort of, yeah, as you say, kind of writing a cliche, that I'm staying really true to who she actually was as a character. Yeah, it's been great fun.
Now, this is my last question, I promise. And just because of the time difference that we've had, and you've sold very well, and you're having all these TV shows made, as I've said, has there been a moment in the last 5-6 years where you thought, oh, okay, this is bigger than I thought it would be?
Well, really good question. I think, I mean, for example, going on the US book tour just now, it blows my mind that people in the States are reading my like weird, dark British books. Like, I still don't really get it. And I think, yeah, the contrast between, you know, when I did one of my first events, 7 people came, 5 of them were known to me. You know, it was like my boyfriend, now husband, like my best friend, her friend, my editor, and my publicist, and then 2 confused members of the public who were like, how do all these people know each other so well? And then going to the States and doing like events, and there are like 400 people there who all want their book signed. And like, that is mind blowing. But Yeah, I mean, it's just a really, really lovely thing. And I still don't really understand it, and I don't really feel worthy. I'm like, I don't, why are you here? Thank you for being here. This is amazing. So I think that has really kind of brought it home to me. But it still doesn't change, me at my desk or me at the coffee shop with my notebook.
And that is it for Lucy Foley, the new Queen of Mystery, writing a new Miss Marple as well as we speak. The new book is The Midnight Feast. You can get a copy. If you do, use the link in the episode notes or wherever you've got this. And remember, there are over 350 brilliant authors from all types of genres waiting to share their daily routine with you. You can find that on our Writer's Routine podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows, and you've got loads of clips here on YouTube. So make sure you give this video a like, subscribe and follow, because I can't wait to be back with you bringing more brilliant authors really soon. Thanks to Lucy Foley, and thank you for watching.